Joining us now, NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, also with us, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, and Temidayo Aganga-Williams, former federal prosecutor. So let's start with you, Lisa. What specifically is different in this superseding indictment vis-a-vis the original one?
Well, let's start with the biggest change, Jose. The Supreme Court had said that President Trump's communications with his Department of Justice were part of his core constitutional authority, and the special counsel has responded to that by taking out of this superseding indictment over 15 paragraphs that just talked about the plan to use the Department of Justice to essentially put its thumb on the scale and tell state legislatures that they didn't have to accept their state's slate of electors. That includes a series of conversations with senior leadership at the Department of Justice who told the president in no uncertain terms that there was no evidence of widespread fraud. So that's all gone. In addition, there are some recharacterizations, as you mentioned. There was an effort to try and refer to former Vice President Pence in his capacity as president of the Senate, not as vice president, where he could be considered a presidential advisor, but in his capacity as president of the Senate. It's clear that he and former President Trump are communicating in a different way for which there wouldn't be necessarily presidential immunity. Those are the two biggest changes. And of course, there are many others throughout the complaint, Jose.
Vaughn, how is Trump world reacting to this?
I want to let you listen to J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's running mate. He is the only one so far, at least on camera, who has addressed this superseding indictment against his running mate just 2 months before the election. Take a listen.
I don't think that it changes anything legally. I think it's clearly an effort to try to do more election interference from Jack Smith. He should be ashamed of himself, and it's one of the reasons why we have to win, because he should not be anywhere near power.
Donald Trump himself did send off a flurry of social media posts overnight, calling this a direct assault on democracy. Among those social media posts there, he went on to call this election interference for the 2024 election. We have seen in recent weeks, really over the better part of the summer, him begin to lay the groundwork to be able to claim that the 2024 election was rigged and that election interference changed the outcome of the election. This is another moment in which, sort of facts aside in this case here, he is continuing to argue that the fact that this indictment exists at all after the Supreme Court's immunity decision amounts to election interference. 2 weeks ago, outside of his Bedminster Club, I had the chance to ask him if he were to get back in the White House, would he order his attorney general to dismiss the indictment for those federal cases against him. He did not explicitly answer me, but he said that they were nonsense cases. Of course, if he were to get in the White House in 2025, he would potentially be able to order his Department of Justice to toss these cases against him, which only raises the stakes of this election, Jose.
Indeed. And so, Temidayo, among the things that stuck out to me, the very first line says the original indictment began with, quote, Donald Trump was the 45th president of the United States. But this new superseding indictment starts with, quote, Donald Trump was a candidate for president in 2020. What does this change mean?
Jose, what that change means is that Jack Smith is focused on adhering to the Supreme Court's immunity decision, which means taking these charges out of the potential realm of official acts and putting them into unofficial acts. And that's what this new indictment is seeking to do. Supreme Court didn't give a whole lot of guidance here, but Jack Smith is effectively going on the offensive. He's getting ahead of this and going to Judge Chutkan with a revised, slimmed-down indictment that really talks about candidate Trump, not President Trump. And what that means here is that he's providing a roadmap that Judge Chutkan, after hearing from the former president's lawyers, could potentially move this case forward to trial. Now, that trial is not going to happen before Election Day, but it does show that the Department of Justice has no intention of backing off on this case and is moving full speed ahead.
So, moving full speed ahead, Lisa, what exactly happens next with this election interference case?
So, Jose, one of the reasons that the Department of Justice might have put forward that superseding indictment yesterday is because they were already facing a deadline this coming Friday for a joint status report with former President Trump's lawyers. That's where each party was supposed to tell Judge Chutkan how they think this case should move forward and when and how. That deadline still exists. And so unless Judge Chutkan comes forward and cancels that, we should expect to hear by Friday from both sides, now that there's been a superseding indictment, what comes next. My expectation is former President Trump's lawyers will say, we get a whole new round of briefing to move to dismiss this indictment on grounds, including but not limited to the fact that it still doesn't comport with the Supreme Court's ruling as to what acts former President Trump is entitled to immunity for. But this is a good faith effort by the special counsel's office to bring this indictment in line with the Supreme Court's ruling. And just as it is in some places, as Tamadayo said, aggressive, in other places, it's very modest. There were a whole series of allegations about January 6th, for example, and communications that former President Trump had that day with advisors, including with respect to the issuance of tweets and public statements. Because those conversations took place with people in the executive branch on White House property, all of those things are gone, including some of the famous tweets and public statements that he issued in the wake of the violence at the Capitol. And so we'll just have to wait to see how Judge Chutkan believes this should go forward. But the time horizon for this case has certainly lengthened. We are nowhere near having a trial in this case, and in fact, may be ripe for briefing that will go all the way up to the Supreme Court and back again before this case is ready for trial, Jose.
And Lisa, meanwhile, I want to play for you something that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said. She spoke with CBS News. I want to play for you some of her remarks.
You were concerned about broad immunity.
I was concerned about a system that appeared to provide immunity for one individual under one set of circumstances, when we have a criminal justice system that had ordinarily treated everyone the same.
What do you make, Lisa, of her comments?
You know, Jose, on one hand, Justice Brown Jackson isn't telling us anything that we didn't already know from reading her writings in the case. On the other hand, it's highly unusual for a sitting Supreme Court justice to comment on a decided case that happened so recently. I can think of no other historical example where someone on the court is commenting on a case decided just months ago. She is choosing her words very carefully, but the fact that that subject was not off limits with CBS News' Norah O'Donnell tells me that Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, even in her modest way, is trying purposefully to talk about that case and convey a message, even if it's not straying so far from her written words.